Hi, I'm Yvonne Farley from the University of Iowa School of Social Work, and I'm here to talk about forgiveness as a tool to enhance healing processes in practice. So first, the forgiveness definition. The willingness to abandon one's right to resentment, negative judgment, and indifferent behavior towards one who unjustly hurts us, while at the same time fostering the undeserved qualities of compassion, generosity, and even love toward him or her. And that's from Enright Coyle. Using the Enright's model, they want us to remember that forgiveness should be gently offered to our clients. It shouldn't turn into a should. Okay, next slide. When we look at the individual in the relationship, we want to remember that forgiveness is an intrinsic healing process. It's actually a natural process, except that we've been socialized to hold in our anger, and we're taught revenge and avoidance of pain. And so, first of all, in Enright, he offers us this model that we have to get in touch with the feeling of anger at the injustice that's been done to us, and we have to make a decision, a specific decision to forgive. And that means that we have to decide that what we've been doing hasn't worked so good, and we are ready to try something different. And then we make the decision to heal. It's a conscious act. Then we work on healing, which is some of the hardest part, where we try to understand the offender and then develop compassion towards the offender. And part of this step is also accepting the pain that is part of it. And after those things are done, there's a discovery of the tremendous freedom of being able to be released from this pain. Next. Thank you. Okay, our second model is Crenshaw's family apology process. And this is primarily talking about child abuse and neglect, but could maybe be applicable in some cases to divorce. But there is a philosophy of restorative justice in order to heal the family as opposed to punishing the family. This incorporates concepts of reciprocal imbalance from Nagy, and some of the key parts there is that families are based on trust and loyalty, and there's ledgers of entitlement. And so when an offense has occurred, people feel like they lack justice and they are entitled to some kind of restoration. And so the intervention should be aimed at restoring justice to the child or the victim. Next slide, please. Okay, so if this process occurs, we have some of the outcomes that we would expect if there was an apology process restoring the justice within the family. We would see that the victim would no longer be so fascinated with the offender, and so that would decrease. We would also notice that the relationship between the offender and the victim will be transformed from pathology to health, and that generally the victim will have more healthy attributions and expectancies of the world context, and that would increase. And most importantly here, the victim moves to a survivor mentality. And this is based on the work of Chloe Madonis, if you would like to look at it further. Okay, next slide. The internal level self-forgiveness. This is our third model, and some of the definitions here is a willingness to abandon self-resentment in the face of one's own acknowledged objective wrong. So a person knows they have done something wrong, and they're going to abandon their self-resentment and foster compassion and generosity and love towards themselves. And this includes a reconciliation with the self, and it occurs within this context that a person has broken their own standards and they're having negative reactions to themselves. Next slide, please. So here are some of the phases of Enright's self-forgiveness model. The first one is facing the reality of who am I, considering that I have done these acts and I haven't lived up to who I thought I was. So this facing this reality and asking these questions of who I am is a very important piece of this. Then we have the decision phase, much like in the model with someone else, but we have to do some reconsideration of our previous judgments of ourselves and have that willingness, just like in the other model, a willingness to explore other possible ways of approaching the wrongdoing. So one of the ways in the work phase here, one of the ways to do this is to reframe the behaviors in the context that they happened. Because whenever we do that, we have so much greater understanding and insight into why the behaviors occurred. And usually the person has their own sense of suffering. And that is part of what has occurred to them as they have suffered themselves. And so after they have a reframe and a self-awareness, then they are able to move to self-compassion, to have compassion towards what they have gone through. And then again, we have this piece that can be so difficult about accepting the pain that oftentimes people resist. It may be the most difficult piece. And then lastly, the outcome phase is people finding a meaning in their suffering, very much like Viktor Frankl talks about. They have to decide what is going to be their meaning of their wrongdoing, and can they find a purpose that can transform that into something positive, and then release that self-resentment that they have. Next slide. Okay, so some common concerns with the use of self-forgiveness models is, does the act merit forgiveness? And this is a huge issue, especially with war veterans, is, are there any acts which are too terrible to forgive? And how a person answers that question has a lot to do with whether or not they are able to take this next step. Because one of the biggest barriers is the person asking the question, do I need to continue to suffer as an appropriate consequence for what I did? And so if I believe that, then I'm going to be reluctant to actually consider forgiving myself. So that is one of the key pieces that we want to keep in mind as we look at this Enright self-forgiveness model. Okay, in conclusion then, what we would like to do is point out that these interventions are often alternatives to current practices in the social work profession. And there may be a question in many of your minds, is forgiveness an appropriate activity for the helping professions, such as social work and psychology? And all of these models would heartily answer yes, it is part of a model, it is part of a healing process, and that actually the therapy model, it contains a contrition process where people are kind of talking about what they feel like they have done wrong. So it's actually a perfect opportunity to include forgiveness. But some people may wonder, is forgiveness a spiritual activity? And if so, are spiritual activities appropriate for interventions? And again, depending on how you answer that question, if you answer it yes, then you're fine with all these models. If you answer it no, really the Enright model is a secular version that could be used in the healing process in a more neutral way. So I encourage you to really consider incorporating forgiveness into your practice, and we'll show the reference pages if you would like to have further details. Thank you.